Greetings, welcome to Kinesiology 236, Chapter 10. Specifically, we're talking about the foot and ankle joints. When I started breaking down this chapter and I started truncating the slides from the book, at first blush it looked like a pretty small chapter, pretty easy one to rip through, but as I got into it, with some of the detail that they were going into and some of the experiences I have in talking about feet and running technique and also reflexology and some of the massage therapy components you can do on your feet using wakers, it kind of got a little bit beefy. So it may only look like 77 slides, but I think we're going to end up having two different presentations. So we'll break this in half partway through. I'm not sure where the breakoff point will be, but I anticipate two. All right, guys, here we go. So the ankle and the foot have 26 bones that form. They list two arches in the book. It's actually two subarches going from the calcaneus to the toes, or you want to think of it like the talus to the toes. Excuse me, and that runs from basically the heel to the toes if you want to think of it in that direction. And then the other runs across the foot from the first metatarsal over top to the fifth metatarsal in that arch kind of pattern. 19 muscles all work together to make the magic happen around the ankle and the feet. And also there's a bunch of intrinsic muscles, and that's reflected on page 320 in the book. And you'll see this later on in slide presentation. There's a ton of muscles that all work to help stabilize the feet and stabilize the toes and work to balance us, really, quite frankly, when we're standing, walking, running, or jumping, any activities where we're on our feet. So the entire load of our body is placed on the bones, as we learned through the femur, down into the tibia, and into the feet. And any kind of rocking back and forth, side to side, matter of fact, if you're standing right now while listening to me drone on, you can kind of feel your weight transfer from one side to the other and think of the articulations, however minor, that are happening across the base, the two bases that are the feet. Whether you're rotating your hips, leaning forward, leaning back, you're going to have articulation across the feet and muscles that are working to make that happen. So oftentimes when I talk with people and I do different exercises, we might be working on a BOSU, or even like we demonstrated in class, gosh, I think it was like week 3, you're perhaps standing on one foot on a BOSU, and that BOSU wobbles back and forth. Well, the muscles that are in the feet and across the ankles have to learn how to stabilize and learn how to fire correctly to stabilize. And so that impulse, the sensory side of the central nervous system takes an impulse up, and then the other side, zap, comes back down the central nervous system. So you have the afferent and efferent sides of the central nervous system that work to fire the muscles in a coordinated manner in the feet to help you stand. So even as you're just kind of transferring weight in your feet right now, kind of shifting back and forth, you can feel that weight transfer across the feet, however subtle. So as we go through this, don't freak out too much about learning all the bones. At some point, it could be like a little bit of overkill. What I'm most interested in is kind of compare and contrast the levels in the feet compared to the levels in the hand. And also kind of take note of the different levels, meaning from the ankle or the heel all the way forward to the toes. And notice some of the nomenclature and the verbiage that is used or are used for the hands and the feet, and kind of compare those. All right. And as I mentioned in the last slide, a ton of motor coordination. We talked about that center of gravity, standing one foot on a BOSU, but if you recall back to where we were in the weight room, we partnered everybody up and we were standing, and you went up on the balls of your feet and you leaned forward or you leaned back. There's a weight transfer across the feet. And then that weight transfer, now when you start talking about the relationship between stability and instability, and at least in my world, acceleration, you'd like to have somebody who's very comfortable being unstable, so they have to be able to be on the balls of the feet. Well, they have to be able to pivot and turn and change direction and jump, etc., on the balls of the feet. But that comes with a high degree of motor coordination, total body, but also across the foot complex and the ankle complex to allow people to be able to change direction, cut, and pivot, but do so in a very coordinated manner. So just think back to what we did, kind of gross motor, standing there flat-footed, going up on the balls of the feet, leaning forward, leaning sideways, etc., and how our feet had to articulate, even going sideways, from big toe on one foot to pinky toe on the other, or first metatarsal to fifth metatarsal, and how we shifted from side to side, and even going side to side. You can feel that weight transfer now, first metatarsal to fifth metatarsal. from the inside edge of the foot to the outside edge of the foot. Just think that through, but realize that many times gross motor activities, especially running, walking, jumping, etc., you have a close kinetic chain with your feet in the ground, and your feet have to be engaged in the process. So the levels of the foot, much like the hand, you can kind of get overwhelmed by all the different little bones that are in the wrist, if you recall. So in this example, if you look on the left, you have rear foot, midfoot, forefoot, and then if you look to the right, you have tarsal bones, metatarsal bones, and phalanges. Well, in the hand, you had the wrist, you had the palm of the hand, and then you had the fingers. Well, you had carpals, metacarpals, and then phalanges or phalanx, the joints themselves, in the fingers. Now you have the same thing in the toes. So if you compare and contrast this, you look at this and you go, tarsals are the carpals, metatarsals are like the palm, in this case it's the arch, right? And it begins to be part of the forefoot in here as well. Then you have the phalanges, what articulates the toe, the bones in the toe that articulate. The way I remember this is you had a metatarsal and a metacarpal. You had carpals and tarsals. Well, you have toes in your feet, but you have toes in your hands, so you have tarsal, toes, metatarsal, metatarsal, toes, tarsal, toes. That's the way I remembered it. It was a real easy way for me to just remember that when I was going through school. But the big thing I'll be interested in with this is just knowing this level, tarsal, metatarsal, and phalanges, and a little bit about distal, middle, and proximal phalanx like you saw in the hand. All right, so the book goes into and explains how you have the ankle bones themselves, the malleoli. In the malleoli, you have a medial and lateral. And notice with the lateral, and this allows you to orient, with the lateral, you have the fibula that comes down, and the fibula is, or ends, the distal end, is the lateral malleolus, whereas the tibia provides the medial malleolus, and there's a height differential between those. So a really easy way to orient this is, you know you're looking from an anterior view on this one, and you know your tibia is the big beefy weight-bearing bone, and the fibula is out here, so you know this is lateral. You always know this is lateral. And from the back side, it's the same thing. Now this is the back side of the right leg, right? Because it's on the right side of your screen, so you know it's the back side. Lateral malleolus, medial malleolus. I tried to make that a little more apparent over here by going with lateral in lemon or lime green, excuse me, and a medial in kind of a magenta color. How's that for color codification? And again, just realize that one way you can orient yourself is the lateral comes off of the fibula, the medial comes off of the tibia, or the lateral actually is more distal to the medial side. All right, so with those malleoli, which is the proper term for two of them, with the malleoli, you have muscles that come down. If you remember that pulley system we had talked about earlier in the class, the book uses a mnemonic Tom, Dick, and Harry, which is tibialis T, flexor digitorum D, and then flexor hallucis longus H, for those muscles that wrap around and give you that pulley effect on the back side of the malleoli. And the connection point for many of these bones are on the sides of the feet, wrap under the foot into the arch, or on the metatarsals themselves. And the book kind of gets lost a little bit in this process when you start talking about tibialis anterior, peroneus longus, and the muscles themselves. I'm not going to get too stressed out on these, but you will have, as we've had before, you're going to have the which muscle am I, and I'll use some of this verbiage in there. But realize when you look at like tibialis posterior, you're going to have multiple insertions. It's not like it's just a one bone thing. So you're going to have to kind of look at this in the book and orient yourself regarding some of these for the what muscle am I component of the exam that's going to be coming up. And same thing, I'm just going to kind of rip through this. Same deal here. And get into this little beefy part, right? Tibiofibular. So you have the joint itself, the tibia and the fibula, this little joint down here where the two bones come together, that's the distal end, and you have a tibiofibular joint, tibiofibular. Now, you have the same thing on a more proximal level up top, right? You can see here's proximal tibiofibular, and you have that on the backside as well. Now there is no articulation there per se, but you have the bones come together at that location or locations, and you have this interosseous membrane, pretty strong tendinous-like material that helps hold the bones together. All right, so with the anterior tibiofibular ligament, and I leave this one in because the tibiofibular ligament itself is usually the one that's sprained. If you can think of like an an inversion, where a person rolls their ankle, cutting, rolling. We talked, I think, standing in the classroom or in the weight room, talking about a reach block. If you go big toe down on the ground first and you can pivot out, you're going to minimize the possibility of a reach block or tearing your anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament on a reach block. But I tried to highlight this as best as possible in here. And I think what I might do is I'll put a video in these slides after the fact. I'll shoot a video so you can see what a reach block looks like going big toe to small toe. So you can see that guy. It's not there now, but I will put it in. Actually, yeah, and just for sake of being able to see this a little more clearly, I took the picture itself from the previous slide, blew it up for you, and here's that ligament right here. Okay. They make the distinction between two different joints or two different tendons in the ankle and describing sprains for each. And I left this in because usually these guys do kind of run together, the calcaneofibular and the anterior tibiofibular, and try to color codify these things here. Anterior tibiofibular is in red, and then also calcaneofibular is in blue, and you can kind of make them out here. But what we did is this. Blew this picture up for you so you can see it in blue here. You can also see it in red here. And just kind of take note about the structure here of how this all ties together, right? With the ligament here and the ligament here. And how we can just imagine in an inversion of the ankle how both of those would be stretched and how you could run the risk of tearing those, but more likely spraining or straining those. Less common is on the medial aspect. I left these here, and I'm not going to talk too much about them. The arches themselves, and it was very difficult to see this in the book version, and they have the arches, and the way it describes this is the extension from the calcaneus bone to the talus navicular, 3 cuneiforms and distal ends of the 3 medial metatarsals. And really in the book, it looks like just one of them came over, so I tried to give you this in purple so you can see it a little bit better, how it comes over 1, 2, 3, and extends to the 3 medial metatarsals. So you got metatarsal 1, metatarsal, toe, got it, 1, 2, and 3. And then when you get a little bit further into this, you have the lateral longitudinal, which is the 4th and 5th. So you have metatarsal 1, 2, 3, and here's number 4 and 5. I hope that is a little bit more clear and easier to see. It just you couldn't see that on the book version. They did not do a good job. They made it look like there was just one here, as opposed to the 3 for the first 3 digits and the 2 and a lateral for the last 2 digits, number 4 and 5. There's a transverse arch, and that transverse arch goes, as its name suggests, transverse across the foot, from the 1st to the 5th. And oftentimes you'll have individuals who will come in with some type of plantar fasciitis issue, and there's a number of different modalities you can use to help relieve the discomfort they have in plantar fasciitis. But in the sole of the foot, you have fascia that runs, and oftentimes that gets inflamed. It just gets inflamed from overuse. I hate to say it, but usually it's the RICE protocol, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Usually it's a ton of ice and it's a ton of rest. I find myself just having to work through it and just ice the crap out of my foot, sticking my foot in a Homer bucket. At this point, I'm going to take a break from the slides and be back in 1 second.